Hey everyone, Scott here to discuss Fight Club, starring Brad Pitt, Edward Norton, Helena Bonham Carter, Meatloaf, Ade, and Jared Leto, directed by David Fincher. Now, I remember seeing the trailer for this back when it was coming out before I ever saw Star Wars: The Phantom Menace in theaters. So, but I didn't see it until later years because I was a little too young for it. But I did see it in my adult life eventually. But what do I think of it? Let's get into it and we'll find out. The narrator, who happens to be Ed Norton, whom I'm going to call for this entire show because he's the protagonist, narrates how he knows Tyler Durden, played by Brad Pitt. And we start off at the beginning with Ed as an insomniac office worker as he gets a new apartment with some furniture as Ed uses his imagination as he's in pain and goes to a doctor for it. And I could feel Ed as he's a nervous wreck. And this is all thanks to great acting by Ed Norton. And he goes to group therapy while I notice Tyler in the same place blink and you miss him as Robert Bob Paulson, played by Meatloaf Ade, or now Meatloaf nowadays, starts giving Ed a hug as he shares his feelings with Ed, and I'm digging the characters as they're magnificently cast by the right actors. Ed goes to move to more group meetings and eventually meets Marla Singer, played by Helena Bonham Carter, as he is led to believe she's a liar, and we see all of this from Ed's point of view as he wants Marla out of his life. And I absolutely love the way the film is shot. Whereas these images are great to look at in this movie. It's very well shot, and very well made, and the characters are greatly casted, and the writing in this is brilliant. And did anybody know this was a novel? Because I personally did not when I first saw the trailer, before I saw Star Wars: The Phantom Menace, as I was convinced it looked good. But at the time, I was a little too young for it when it came out in theaters back in 1999. But I won't announce my age at this point, as it doesn't matter. But I do see it in my adult life, and what I thought when I saw this on my first viewing, but left rather confused. This is good filmmaking by Mr. David Fincher. Ed talks to Marla to grab some nights of different groups, therapies, as he doesn't want to see her ever again, as we see Ed going out of town for business trips as he flies back home and meets Tyler, who makes bars of soap for a living. And I really think Brad Pitt is perfect in the role of Tyler Durden, as he nails it quite well. He gets back on land and sees one of his bags was left behind as it was ticking from the airport, from what the airport worker said, which feels like a fucking lie right off the bat. Ed's apartment explodes as he's now homeless and almost calls Marla, but doesn't say a damn thing as he hangs up and decides to call Tyler, and also hangs up without saying a word, but Tyler calls him back on the phone booth, and they go to a bar and get drinks, and the scenes with Brad Pitt and Ed Norton in them work like gold. Tyler asks Ed, after Ed asks to stay at Tyler's place, for Ed to hit Tyler as hard as he can, as we move on briefly to a scene as the movie theater projection room as film gets cigarette burns, and explains where the movie theaters is filled with patrons. And we go back to Tyler asking Ed to hit him as hard as he can, and he does hit him like a panty wuss. Would they and they fight and say they have to do that again sometime as they go to his place, and Tyler shows him where his room is, and they practice fighting and make a fight club where they beat each other up and have rules about not talking about Fight Club, and they have to fight anyways as Ed shows up at work with a bruised eye. Every single day after every week from Fight Club, as Marla calls him while at Tyler's house, and they start having sex, which was an interesting choice, I guess. And the next morning, he breaks it off as Tyler comes by her place and they start fucking as he breaks her out of being arrested by the cops, and as she kept going about herself as a criminal and saying good luck curing her, was pretty fucking hilarious. Ed hears Tyler and Marla fucking one another while doing some workout, and he goes to sleep and goes into work the next day, and his boss tells him to take the rest of the day off because he's smoking a cigarette and has a new attitude, and his boss doesn't like it, and Ed gets on phone call from the cops to come in the police station to talk with him, but he can't, and Marla comes downstairs and talks with Ed while touching his dick, but he's so far not turned on by her, as Tyler wants to get rid of her as well as Ed does, and the movie does an excellent job at the POV of Ed. Tyler and Ed steal some meat juice that is dangerous and use it for cooking reasons, which seems rather a dangerous idea, but this movie is all about the fun of danger and narcissism, as it does it in the best way possible. For example, Tyler almost torturing Ed's hand, and he eventually cleans it up, and Ed comes to work, and his boss finds a paper about Fight Club, and Marla calls him about getting a doctor without getting a hospital, and he leaves her place and bumps into Bob as he's a member of Fight Club. As the next scene, Ed fights with Bob, and at that scene, Tyler learns something about someone breaking a rule of Fight Club, and he's pissed off about it, and the owner of the bar comes in and brings back up with him, and as he wants everyone to end Fight Club at his bar, and beats the living shit out of Tyler, and Tyler eventually fights back and gets backed up by his men as possible of a homework assignment, and that is picking a fight with other people like their bosses and a pastor, as Ed gets fired from his job and breaks his office by hitting himself like his boss is beating him. But security doesn't buy it and escorts Ed out of the building, as he's getting much more violent nowadays. And Tyler gives out homework assignments to vandalize something in the city, and all this is becoming violent as this movie is called Fight Club. If anyone is expecting a romantic comedy, they're shit out of luck, as this is a smart script with very great writing, as they rob a convenience store man named Raymond and tells him to run home. And I love the script. It's very well written. Ed and Marla get in another argument and throws her out again. How many times is he going to do that? This is the fourth time he threw her out of this movie? I mean, this is a great movie, but it's taking a little too long to get to the end. But I am not bored. In fact, it's the exact opposite. It's just one problem is it needs a little more editing, make it at least 2 hours and 10 minutes, as 10 minutes too long. The practice rejecting people joining Fight Club, and for a successful day, they watch the TV and see they vandalize, which works rather well, to be perfectly honest with you. They pick a fight with an older person named Bob, not the Meatloaf character, and threaten him in the bathroom dressed like the employees at a hotel. And where the cops come, they split up as Angel Face, played by a young Jared Leto, is beat up by Ed, and everyone looks at Ed like he's a fucking psycho, as they get in a car together and have an argument about involving Ed in the vandalism, as they talk about who warned Fight Club, and Ed learns Tyler is the one who blew up Ed's apartment, and they purposely crash into a car, and Tyler brings Ed back to the house while Ed is unconscious and ditches Ed for life, which made me sort of miss Tyler at this point. So now it's Ed running Fight Club. Marla comes by, and next thing you know, Bob is shot in the head by the cops, but because they destroyed a coffee shop, as the others want to bury Bob, and Ed doesn't want to, as the gang repeats the line, "His name is Robert Paulson," over and over again. And Ed wants to find Tyler as he goes to various locations and is unsuccessful, as he's starting to realize Tyler is a dream while trying to find him. And if you think that's the twist, you have another thing coming. as there's more to come, particularly the twist. A man working at the bar where Fight Club is taking place and he calls him Tyler Durden, and Marla calls him the same name while Ed is calling her and Tyler shows up out of the blue and reveals Ed as Tyler, as this is the twist the audience didn't see coming, as it's brilliant. It's a brilliant twist that Ed isn't really ready to believe quite yet. Ed wakes up at the hotel room as he checks out and comes back home to warn the companies that something horrible is about to happen to them. And he finds Marla and begs her to hear him out at a restaurant and tells her to leave town, but she rejects as she leaves Ed, and he goes to arrest himself at the police station. Was rather a trip, in my opinion. He confesses to the cops that they're led to believe he's crazy, and three men try to torture Ed, but he manages to escape the police station and runs for his life and hides himself as Tyler pops up again as he's going to a parking garage, and Ed goes up and sees a truck and there's a bomb set up and he stops the trigger, and Tyler versus Ed fight is rather fucking brutal, and Tyler puts a gun in Ed's mouth while they're in a building to watch a building get vandalized as Marla arrives at the building, and Ed has the gun but can't shoot Tyler because he's a parasite in Ed's mind, so Ed kind of kills himself and gets the parasite out of his mind as Ed is Tyler, as the men brings Marla up, and the twist is a trip, like a what the fuck kind of an ending, to the point it makes you want to watch the movie again, which is super brilliant of an ending. Now it's time for the rating. I'll give this movie a 9.1 out of 10. This movie is very well acted, made, written, and the performances by the actors are gold. The actors were put in the right role as they pull it off spectacularly as it's meant for them. The twist, man, is a really big trip. Like, what the fuck just happened? And makes you want to watch the movie again. Not only it's that good, it's brilliant. Maybe the best of David Fincher's resume so far. Even though I would say so far. So I'd like to thank you guys for joining me, and next time we'll be back with Panic Room. And until next time, if this is your first night in Fight Club, you have to fight.